to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where each gentle tale is made to soften the edges of the day and guide you toward rest. Tonight, you'll drift beside a quiet train whose windows are full of flowers, gliding through a world that feels like twilight made real. Settle yourself into stillness just as you are. Let your shoulders loosen as if warm hands have unknotted them. Let your jaw relax, your tongue resting easily, your forehead smoothing out like calm water. If you'd like, take a slow breath in through your nose and let it out with a soft sigh. Again, a steady inhale and an even slower exhale, as though you're breathing out all the little errands and unfinished thoughts that have followed you around. Imagine the room around you growing quieter, not because anything changes, but because you no longer need to hold it so tightly. The air is gentle, the light is dim and kind. Perhaps there is a faint sense of evening outside, a hush that wraps the world in cotton. With each breath, you sink a little deeper into comfort, like a pebble finding the perfect place at the bottom of a clear pond. In a moment, you won't have to do anything at all. You won't have to picture every detail perfectly. You can simply listen, letting the words pass by like clouds, letting them carry you. And as you relax, the story will begin to move on its own, becoming something you can float inside. Now, with your breathing slow and easy, the view gently shifts, and the tale begins to unfold at a distance like a lantern seen across a meadow. In a small station tucked between soft hills and sleeping trees, there was a train that rarely appeared to anyone who was in a hurry. It did not arrive for the clatter of deadlines or the sharp tapping of impatient shoes. It came for those whose hearts had begun to crave quiet again, for those who had remembered, even faintly, that there are journeys meant for nothing but soothing the spirit. The station itself was unassuming, built from smooth river stone and pale wood that had been rubbed by time into satin. Ivy wandered lazily along the beams, not climbing with urgency but drifting, as if it enjoyed the feeling of being held by the building. Lanterns glowed with honeyed light, their glass slightly fogged, as though they had been breathing along with the evening. On a bench beneath a roof that smelled faintly of cedar, a woman named Elowen sat, with her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't waiting in the way people usually waited. There was no tightness in her posture, no restless scanning of the tracks. She simply sat, listening to the hush between sounds. Elowen had wandered into the station without quite knowing how. Earlier the day had been loud in her mind, full of little sharp corners. Thoughts had piled up like leaves caught in an eddy, and even when she tried to shake them free, they clung. She had walked to clear her head, following a path that felt familiar and yet not entirely mapped. until the trees had thinned and the station had appeared like a gentle surprise. Now the air around her was cool and soft. A light mist hovered just above the ground, curling around the stones as if it were practicing a slow dance. Somewhere far off, an owl called, not as a warning, but as a lullaby, offered to the valley. When the train arrived, it did not announce itself with a harsh shriek of metal. Instead, there was a low, velvety hum that seemed to rise from the tracks themselves, like a chord played on a distant cello. The rails began to shimmer faintly as though they remembered the warmth of sunlight even after dusk. Then the train slipped into view. It was not long or imposing. It was graceful, as if it had been drawn with careful hands. Its body was painted the color of moonlit cream, with thin lines of muted gold that traced along the edges like quiet embroidery. The wheels turned with a steady whisper, and the windows were extraordinary. Each window was full of flowers, not pressed between glass like old keepsakes, and not merely painted there as decoration. These were living blossoms arranged as though the train had passed through gardens and gathered their beauty without disturbing a single petal. Roses, pale as morning, leaned against panes of glass. Clusters of lavender swayed gently as if moved by an invisible breeze. Small white daisies bobbed like tiny lanterns. Vines of jasmine curled in lazy spirals, their star-shaped blooms glowing softly in the dim. The scent drifted outward as the train slowed, warm and dreamy, mingling with the cool mist and the cedar smell of the station. It was a fragrance that suggested open fields and secret courtyards, sun-warmed stones, and dew-kissed leaves. A door opened with a sigh, and a conductor stepped down. He was neither young nor old in any definite way. His face carried the calm of someone who had watched many sunsets and never grown tired of them. He wore a dark coat with brass buttons that caught the lantern light, and a hat that sat neatly above kind eyes. In his hand was a small ticket punch, not sharp and severe, but delicate, like a tool for making patterns in paper. Elowen rose, not because she felt rushed, but because it seemed like the most natural thing to do. The conductor nodded to her as if he had been expecting her all along. "Evening," he said, and his voice was soft enough to blend with the mist. "If you'd like to travel, there is a seat waiting." Elowen did not ask where the train was going. A curious peace had settled over her, and questions felt unnecessary. She stepped forward, her shoes making little sounds on the platform, and climbed aboard. Inside, the air was warm and gently perfumed. The walls were polished wood, the color of chestnuts. Lamps hung overhead, their light mellow, as if it had been filtered through petals. The seats were upholstered in fabric that looked like moss and shade, deep and comforting. A faint, steady rocking moved through the carriage, even before the train began to glide again, like a cradle remembering its purpose. And the windows from the inside were even more magical. They were lined with flowers tucked into small brass frames, as though each pane was a miniature garden. Some blossoms leaned inward, close to the passengers, and others pressed softly outward against the glass, where night waited patiently. The flowers did not block the view. Instead, they seemed to frame it, inviting the eye to look through beauty before entering the world beyond. Elowen chose a seat by a window where blue blossoms clustered like a piece of twilight itself. She rested her hands on the armrests and felt the fabric beneath her palms, thick and reassuring. Her breath had already slowed without her noticing. The train gave a contented hum, like a cat settling into sleep. The conductor moved down the aisle, his steps quiet. When he reached Elowen, he held out a small ticket, already written in looping script. It was the color of cream, with a pressed petal tucked into one corner. Elowen took it. The words on it were simple, and yet they shimmered slightly, as if they were alive. A gentle journey. She smiled, though it was a small smile, more felt than seen. The conductor tipped his hat. No need to hold on to anything heavy, he murmured, as if speaking to her thoughts rather than her ears. Just watch, just listen. Let the ride do the work. And then he continued on, and the train began to move. At first, it rolled slowly, as though it didn't want to disturb the station's quiet. The platform slid away, lanterns dimming behind them. The mist drifted and reformed. Trees gathered close to the tracks, their branches reaching in with a friendly curiosity. Elowen watched the world pass. She could see her reflection faintly in the glass, softened by the flowers. It was like seeing herself through gentleness, through patience. Her eyes looked calmer already, her face less tightened by the day. Outside, the landscape was painted in night tones. Hills rose and fell like slow breathing. Small ponds caught the last scraps of light and turned them into silver. The sky above was velvety, scattered with stars that seemed unusually near, as though the train had chosen a route closer to the heavens. The flowers at the window stirred, though there was no draft. Their movement was subtle, like the sway of seaweed under quiet water. Elowen leaned closer, drawn by a soft glow among the petals. If they had borrowed a little moonlight and kept it, when Elowen looked at it, she felt a gentle easing behind her ribs, as though some careful hand had loosened a knot. She did not touch the flower. She only watched, and that was enough. The train carried her onward, and the world outside began to shift in a way that felt like dreaming. The trees grew taller, their trunks smooth and light as bone. Their leaves were wide and soft, and they caught the starlight in a way that made the forest seem dusted with quiet glitter. Between the trunks were patches of fog that drifted like slow thoughts, forming shapes and then dissolving. A small stream ran alongside the tracks for a while, keeping pace as though it enjoyed the company. It made a sound like whispered syllables, and Elowen found her mind wanting to follow it, to become as fluid and unburdened as water. In the next carriage, someone was playing a melody so soft it barely existed. Perhaps a music box, perhaps a tiny harp. The notes drifted through the air and threaded themselves between the scent of flowers and the hum of wheels. Elowen's eyelids grew heavier, but she kept them open, content to be awake inside this gentle motion. She felt as though the train itself was thinking for her, carrying her without effort. It was an unfamiliar relief. The conductor returned not to check tickets, but to offer a small cup of something warm. He placed it on a fold-out tray attached to the seat in front of her. Steam curled upward, carrying a scent like chamomile and honey, like herbs warmed by sunlight. Elowen wrapped her fingers around the cup. The warmth seeped into her hands, then into her wrists, then into her arms, like comfort slowly expanding. She took a sip. The taste was mild, soothing, neither too sweet nor too strong, and it left a calm trail behind it. The conductor leaned slightly toward her window. "This train," he said, "follows tracks that appear when they are needed. It travels through places that rest inside the world, places most people forget to look for." Elowen listened, though she did not reply. She felt no pressure to speak. The conductor seemed to understand that silence was part of the journey. He gestured toward the flowers. "They're more than decoration," he continued quietly. "Each bloom is a small doorway, not to somewhere distant and complicated, but to something simple. A memory of ease, a feeling of belonging, a moment when everything was gentle." He straightened, and the brass buttons on his coat caught the lamp glow like tiny suns. "If you'd like," he said, "choose one. Just with your eyes. Let it lead you." Then he walked on, and the carriage returned to its soft hush. Elowen looked at the flowers around her window frame. There were so many, each with its own personality. Some were open and generous, petals spread wide like a yawn. Others were tightly furled, keeping their secrets. Tiny blossoms clustered in cheerful constellations. Long, elegant petals curved like a dancer's arms. Her gaze settled on a spray of small bell-shaped flowers, pale blue with deeper shadows at their throats. They reminded her of a field she had once walked through at dusk, long ago, when the air had smelled of wild herbs and the sky had been painted with slow-moving clouds. In that memory, she had been unhurried. She had been young enough to feel that time was wide and forgiving. She had listened to insects singing and watched the first star appear. As she looked at the bell-shaped flowers, the train seemed to respond. The world outside softened, as if someone had turned a page in a book. They were no longer traveling beside a forest. They were moving through a meadow under a twilight sky. The grass rippled in waves, silvered by moonlight. Wildflowers nodded their heads as the train passed, and their colors were muted but luminous. Pale gold, soft violet, gentle cream. The air felt different even through the glass. It seemed warmer, sweet with pollen and dew. Elowen could almost hear the grass breathing. In the distance, fireflies drifted like floating embers, their lights slow and steady. They rose and fell in unison as though guided by a quiet conductor of their own. Elowen watched them and felt her thoughts slow to match their rhythm. The train moved through the meadow without disturbing it. It did not crush the flowers or flatten the grass. Instead, the tracks seemed to hover just above the earth, a path made of light and intention rather than weight. Elowen's shoulders sank further into the seat. The cup in her hands remained warm, as though it had its own small hearth. She took another sip and let the taste linger. As the train continued, the meadow gave way to a landscape of gentle mystery. They entered a region of low hills wrapped in fog. The fog was not cold or eerie. It was soft and milky, curling around the slopes like blankets being tucked in. Here and there, trees appeared like silhouettes, their branches reaching upward, as if they were stretching after a long nap. The flowers in the windows seemed to glow a little more brightly in the fog, their colors deepening. Elowen noticed that each bloom held a tiny bead of moisture, as though it had caught the fog and turned it into dew. She leaned her forehead lightly against the glass. It was cool, soothing. The gentle vibration of the moving train traveled into her bones like a lullaby. In another seat across the aisle, a passenger sat with eyes closed, smiling faintly, hands resting on their lap. There was no conversation, no bustling. It was as though everyone on this train had agreed, without speaking, to be quiet together. The carriage rocked, steady and slow. Lamps swayed almost imperceptibly. Shadows shifted like soft waves. The train entered a tunnel, but it was not a harsh, echoing tunnel of stone. It was formed from arching branches that had woven together high above the tracks, creating a corridor of leaves. The leaves were dark and glossy, and they held droplets that reflected the lamplight as tiny stars. As the train passed beneath, the branches whispered gently, a sound like silk brushing silk. Elowen watched the droplets flash and fade, and felt her mind becoming pleasantly blank, like a slate wiped clean. When the train emerged from the leafy tunnel, it came into a place that felt entirely separate from ordinary geography. There was a lake, broad and calm, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it seemed like another world had opened beneath them. The train followed the shoreline, and the water mirrored the flower-filled windows as streaks of color on glass. The reflection looked like a moving garden gliding along the edge of night. On the lake, small boats drifted without oars, as though carried by the lake's own gentle will. Each boat held a lantern. The lanterns glowed softly, sending trails of light across the water. Elowen watched the boats and felt something inside her unclench, something she hadn't realized she was holding. The conductor appeared again, almost as if summoned by the quiet turning of her thoughts. He stood nearby, hands folded behind his back, gazing out at the lake with a look of fond recognition. "This is the Mirror Lake," he said softly. though he did not sound like he was naming it so much as greeting it. It shows you what you need to see, and sometimes what you need to let go. Elowen's eyes remained on the water. In its surface, she saw not only the sky and the train, but a softer version of herself, as though the lake had smoothed the sharp edges away. She looked like someone who had rested well, someone unhurried, someone gently held by the world. The conductor continued, voice quiet as the rocking carriage. The flowers help. They remind the mind of sweetness. They soften the gaze. They invite the body to remember its natural rhythm. He turned to her window and with a respectful slowness touched the brass frame near a cluster of jasmine. His fingertip did not crush anything. It barely made contact, yet the jasmine seemed to brighten, releasing a faint wave of perfume. Elowen inhaled and her breath deepened on its own. The train glided along the lake and the boats drifted beside it for a while, lanterns keeping pace like friendly companions. The air felt rich with quiet, the kind of quiet that is not empty but full of gentle sounds and the promise of safety. Far across the lake there was a shoreline lit by pale blue light. It looked like a small village made of moonstone with rooftops that shimmered. But it was distant and the train did not hurry toward it. It simply acknowledged it, like a thought passing through the mind without needing to be followed. Elowen's eyelids fluttered again. She let them close for a moment, and in the darkness behind her eyes, she could still see the glow of flowers, the slow movement of lanterns on water. When she opened her eyes again, the scenery had shifted once more. Now the train traveled through a garden. The track wound through it like a gentle ribbon, turning slowly, never sharply. The air was thick with perfume, but not overwhelming, more like being wrapped in a shawl that had been stored with dried blossoms. The flowers by Elowen's window seemed to greet the flowers outside, as if they recognized distant cousins. Petals trembled softly. Colors deepened. For a moment, it looked as though the blossoms inside the window were leaning outward in quiet delight. Some of the blooms outside glowed faintly, lighting the garden from within. Others held tiny moths, their wings pale and velvety, resting in the cups of petals like sleeping guests. A breeze moved through the leaves, and the whole garden seemed to breathe. The train's hum became almost like a purr. Elowen noticed something new among the flowers in her window, small, unopened buds that had not been there before. They were tucked in along the bottom edge of the glass, modest and green, as if they were shy about joining the display. As she watched, one bud began to open. It happened slowly, so slowly it did not feel like an event, but like the natural unfolding of time. A petal separated, then another. Pale color emerged, the hue of early dawn. The blossom revealed itself as a soft, layered flower, something between a peony and a rose, with petals like folded silk. Elowen felt a wave of tenderness, gentle and quiet, The opening bloom was like a promise that things could soften, that time could unfold without being forced. Across the aisle, the other passenger's smile deepened slightly, as if they too sensed the quiet miracle happening in the carriage. The conductor passed by and his eyes flicked toward the new bloom with a small nod. He said nothing, as though words would only make it less sacred. The garden outside began to thin, giving way to a stretch of open sky where the horizon was difficult to find. The train seemed to be traveling along a causeway of light, suspended above a sea of mist. Below, the mist rolled in slow waves. Above, the stars were more numerous, clustered like spilled sugar. A faint band of light stretched across the sky like a milky river. The flowers in the windows took on a starlit sheen. Even the dark leaves looked glossy and deep, reflecting pinpricks of light. Elowen felt as though she were floating. The seat beneath her was steady, the carriage warm. The train held her with quiet certainty. All she had to do was be carried. The conductor's voice drifted from somewhere farther down the carriage, speaking to no one in particular and everyone at once. "Some journeys are meant to solve things," he murmured, "and some are meant to soothe. This one is for soothing." The words sank into Elowen like warm tea. She didn't think about them, she simply let them be. The train's movement remained constant, the rocking rhythm a gentle pendulum. Elowen's breathing matched it, slow in, slow out. Her hands had grown heavy, resting easily on her lap now, cup empty and set aside without her remembering doing it. Outside, the mist below brightened slightly, as though it were catching light from a hidden moon. Shapes moved within it, perhaps clouds folding into one another, perhaps a far-off landscape dreaming beneath its blanket. The train descended gradually, and the air changed again, becoming cooler, fresher, edged with the scent of pine. They were entering a mountain pass. The peaks were not jagged or harsh. They rose like rounded shoulders under a shawl of snow. The train wound between them, following a path that felt safe and familiar, even if Elowen had never been there before. In the mountain air, the flowers in the windows looked even more vivid, their colors a quiet comfort against the pale landscape. Elowen watched a cluster of golden blossoms, like small suns, and felt warmth spread through her chest. The train entered another tunnel, this one carved through the mountain itself. The stone walls were smooth, and faint crystals glimmered within them, catching the lamplight in soft sparkles. The tunnel was not frightening. It felt like being inside the earth's calm heartbeat. The carriage darkened slightly, and the flower-filled windows became the main source of color, their blossoms glowing like gentle stained glass. In that dimness, Elowen's thoughts floated away from her like leaves slipping from a branch. She did not chase them, she did not gather them, she let them drift. When the train emerged, it was into a valley filled with quiet light, as if dawn were beginning somewhere far away but had not yet become day. In the valley there was a village of small houses with roofs like curved shells. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, not in thick plumes but in soft ribbons. The streets were empty, peaceful, and the air looked warm around the windows as if everyone inside was tucked into blankets. The train slowed as it passed, and Elowen saw something tender. In many windows of the village houses, there were flowers too. Not as many as in the train, but enough to make each home look like a little garden glowing from within. The train did not stop. It simply glided through, a quiet visitor, leaving no disturbance behind. A dog curled on a doorstep lifted its head briefly, then rested it again, satisfied. A cat in an upstairs window blinked slowly, unbothered. Elowen's heart softened further. There was something about this place, this sense that rest was normal, that stillness was respected, that felt like a balm. The conductor appeared beside her seat one more time, as if he knew the journey was nearing the part where words could grow fewer. "You may find," he said gently, "that the train carries you not to a destination you can point to on a map, but to a feeling you can return to anytime, even without the tracks." Elowen's eyes followed the curve of the landscape. The valley widened, opening into fields where frost shimmered like sugar on grass. In the distance, a line of trees stood like guardians, their branches heavy with quiet. The conductor's voice softened further. "The flowers in the windows are reminders," he continued. "Reminders that softness belongs to you, that beauty can be close, that the world, even when it is busy, still holds places like this." Elowen did not answer. Her body felt loose, comfortably heavy. Her thoughts had thinned into a gentle haze. She could still see clearly, but she no longer felt the need to label anything. The conductor tipped his hat and walked on, his footsteps nearly silent. The train moved into a stretch of country, where the sky turned deeper and deeper blue, almost black, as if night were returning or perhaps never left. Stars blinked slowly, patient and kind. The carriage lights dimmed a little, and the lamps became more like candles behind frosted glass. The flowers in the windows glowed softly, as if each petal held a tiny ember. Elowen's head leaned back against the seat. Her neck relaxed. Her shoulders dropped further, as though they had finally remembered they could rest. Outside, the world grew simpler. Open space, gentle hills, occasional trees, no sharp edges, no sudden turns. The train's rocking became the main story now, a steady motion that invited sleep. The flowers seemed to sway in time with it, their movement barely there, like breathing. Elowen watched them through half-lidded eyes. A single petal, loosened by the journey, drifted down inside the window frame. It floated as slowly as a feather turning in the lamplight. It settled on the ledge, perfect and still. Elowen's eyes closed. The train continued, carrying her easily. The hum of wheels became a soft blanket of sound. The scent of flowers filled the carriage with sweetness and calm. The air felt warm against her cheeks, cool against her forehead, balanced and gentle. In the distance, the music from the next carriage returned, even softer now, like someone humming in their sleep. Notes rose and faded, never demanding attention, only offering comfort. Elowen's breathing deepened, slow and steady. The train glided through landscapes that no longer needed to be watched. It traveled through mist, through starlight, through quiet valleys and sleeping forests, all of it blending into one long, soothing ribbon of night, and the flowers kept blooming in the windows, endlessly patient, endlessly tender, as if they had all the time in the world. Now the pace slows even more. The train rocks gently, the lamps glow softly, the air is calm and sweet. Elowen rests in her seat, warm and safe. Her hands are still, her face is smooth, her breath moves in quiet waves, in and out, like the shoreline meeting the sea. Outside, the world is simple and kind. A dark sky, a few slow stars, a soft mist over the fields. The train carries her onward without effort. And you, listening, can let your own thoughts loosen and drift. You don't have to follow anything. You don't have to hold anything. Just the sound of a gentle journey. Just the feeling of being carried. The flowers in the windows glow like small blessings. The hum of the train becomes quieter. The rocking becomes slower. Everything settles. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.